everybody, and welcome to the 6th episode of Brent Ewing's Hey Buddy podcast. The podcast this month's going to focus on Halloween and the Halloween movie franchise with my good friend Brandon Thomas. Brandon and I spent about 4 hours on the phone discussing all things Halloween. I'm going to break that down into 2 episodes. The first one obviously dropping today, and the second one dropping on Halloween Day. I apologize for the clarity of this episode. We had to record straight through the MacBook as my microphone had a little snafu, but anyway, hope you guys enjoy and let me know what you think as we talk about all things Halloween.
Hey man, how's things going?
They're going good, dude. Just a little busy, work stuff, just running around. I'm actually going out of town for a conference tomorrow till Thursday, but that's good. It's out in the middle of the woods at a state lodge, so it should be pretty beautiful.
Oh, sweet. And nice dark nights. You got some Halloween movies with you to take out and watch?
Oh, heck yeah. They've got DVD players in all the lodge rooms, so yeah, I've got a stack taken with me.
So when I started this, I'm like, I got to have Brandon on in October. We got to talk about Halloween because there's nobody I know, that loves the movie more than myself other than you. I mean, this is kind of every October, pretty much all year round, I'll watch Halloween, but every October it's kind of a staple. So I knew I wanted to get you on and talk a little bit, go through the series and kind of get your thoughts. We've never really, we've talked about it, but we've never really kind of delve deep into it. I kind of want to get your thoughts on the new one, and we'll go over each one, but I thought it would be a kind of a fun thing to do.
Oh, I can't wait, man. I'm excited.
So you're at the house. You say Katie's gone for a couple of days, right? So you kind of got the house to yourself. You can kick back and watch any of the horror that you want, huh?
Well, yeah, just I typically do that anyway. I can just listen to it a lot louder than normal.
Right. Okay. All right, dude. Well, let's just hop right in, man. Let's start. Let's start with the original. I figure what we could do, maybe just go movie by movie, go through. And when I say movie by movie, I'm definitely excluding the Rob Zombie stuff until at the end because that's just we'll talk about then. But let's go through the 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. H2O, Resurrection, and the new one. Then we'll kind of touch on 3, and we'll touch on the Rob Zombie stuff at the end. Does that sound cool?
Let's do it.
All right, man. So let's just start with 1. Just you take it away. I want to hear your thoughts. I know we've talked about 1, plenty of times, but I want to kind of hear your thoughts on the first one. With obviously it's the classic. It's the one everybody talks about. But dive in, man. Let me hear your thoughts.
Wow. In my opinion, I see the original Halloween as sort of the granddaddy of them all when it comes to, of course, to the slasher movie. But as far as horror, there are other great horror films that came out in that era, The Exorcist and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Shining. But for me, Halloween just towers above everything. It's really the movie that made me start thinking about film in a serious way, that, oh yeah, this can be an art form. It's maybe not the first movie you would go to think about something like that, but when I was in junior high, that was the movie that got me thinking about cinematography. It got me thinking about how important the score is to the film, how important it is to cast a movie well. Look at just the lightning in the bottle when it comes to The Mask. That was just such a crapshoot. It could have easily have been a clown mask, which would have been scary. But that doctored William Shatner mask is iconic, and you just can't beat what they were able to do with that movie. And it to this day, I watched it again last night, in preparation for this, and it still just blows my mind how they were able to do that with such little money. It just looks so good, and it still just absolutely stands the test of time.
I'm with you on, especially, the story, for as great as it is, the acting's good, but man, the cinematography is just, it's unreal. What they were able to do with, like you said, that budget, and I know doing it, one of the first, I know there was a couple movies before it using the Steadicam, but just that opening shot with the Steadicam, and walking, to the house and around the house and up the stairs, just unbelievable. The shots of Michael in the darkness and just that tint of blue on his mask mask as he's coming through the darkness was like, even today, at 37, I see that and I'm like, oh my God, that's creepy.
Oh, it's amazing. Just you look at those really, when you're really into film, sometimes you get into those relationships between directors and cinematographers. And near the top for me is John Carpenter and Dean Cundey. I mean, the work that they did from starting with Halloween all the way through Big Trouble in Little China is just some of the best work I think has ever been done in cinema, especially, when it comes to cinematography.
I don't know. Obviously, you're the buff of the two of us with the movie things. I don't know a lot about certain cinematographers here and there, but the one name that always sticks out, even to Back to the Future. I mean, Dean Cundey. He's like all of my favorite movies. You look and you see principal photography by or cinematography by, and it's Dean Cundey is always there.
I mean, he's worked with some of the greats. I mean, he started with John Carpenter in the low budget world, and then you cut to less than 20 years after Halloween. He's shooting Jurassic Park and Apollo 13 and Hook and just these major, and like you said, the Back to the Future trilogy, he shot the entire trilogy, and those movies look great.
To me, the movie itself is just, it's almost flawless. And I definitely understand why Carpenter was hesitant to do any more. It's like, man, I'm glad they went on and made more, obviously, because I'm a fan of the franchise. But if that one stood alone, I would be more than happy. That, to me, it's in my top, probably my second favorite movie ever.
Mm-hmm.
My first favorite movie, nobody's probably ever heard of. It's a BMX movie called Rad. Do you remember a movie called Rad from the 80s?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, that's my favorite movie of all time. I think a lot of it has to do with me watching it, 100 times a summer whenever I was 6, 7, 8 years old. But to me, this is flawless, man. There's, you have this certain scenes where, oh man, look, this is supposed to be Illinois, and you see a palm tree in the background, or watch this scene and you see John Carpenter's smoke from a cigarette rolling through. But man, you forget about that stuff. That stuff's just kind of a little blip here or there. But this movie is, to me, it's almost flawless.
No, I agree. I think I think there are few perfect movies out there, and again, in my opinion, I feel like Halloween is in that illustrious group. And what makes it so is again, it's such a simplistic story. I mean, it's basically a campfire story that you told with your friends hundreds of times about the escaped maniac from the institution that's coming back to the small town to hack up, unassuming teenagers. But the way that Carpenter does it, he gives that campfire story so much class, which is just astounding to me. I mean, he's a classically trained. He went through the USC School of Cinema, which produced George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola, Brian De Palma. All these great guys that came out in the 70s. And so he's like, okay, we're doing this campfire tale about a guy that's stalking babysitters, but man, we're gonna do it well. We're gonna make this thing look good. This is gonna be a scope movie. We're gonna try and class the joint up with, a good actor. They, obviously, they tried to get Christopher Lee for Dr. Loomis and had to quote unquote settle for Donald Pleasance. But man, Pleasance he classed up the joint with his performance.
Yeah, I can't imagine anybody else. Not that Christopher Lee's not a great actor, but I couldn't imagine anybody with a better take on it than Pleasance. Like it was just perfect all the way through. Ultimately his last one in Part 6, he was that same. I mean, there were subtle changes in his character here and there, which he goes a little crazy, in part, a little bit in Part 2, then in Part 4 he's a little bit nuts, but he just plays it so well. And if anybody else would have been in that role, I don't think. First of all, I don't know that. Say Christopher Lee did it, would he come back for 2, 4, 5, 6? Probably not. So for Pleasance to love it that much, to come back, to those other 5 movies was just, or other 4 movies was just pretty astounding.
Oh yeah, and there's, Christopher Lee had a little bit more of there was a smoothness to him, a real charm, which is why he was so great playing Dracula all those years that he did. And Pleasance brings a little bit of there's always an unnerving twinkle in his eye, even when he was playing a good guy, that you just couldn't dismiss. And even though in the first movie it's Dr. Loomis, a little bit more scaled back, yes, he's the guy that knows exactly what Michael Myers is, but he's keeping it together. He's a professional. He needs someone like Brackett to be on his side, and that was something that Pleasance did so well, is just bring this gravitas. I mean, you think of the scene between him and Charles Cyphers and in the Myers house, where he's giving that speech, that infamous speech, this child with the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. I mean, that is some acting, man. I mean, can you think of any other slasher movie that has a scene like that is just this classically trained actor just chewing this dialogue and just making it his own? It's amazing.
It's so funny when you say that, and I guess it's kind of nerdy, but whenever you said that, dude, and I thought of that scene, I literally got chills, because I can just hear him saying that. I went back and watched, I've binge watched all of them except for Resurrection this past week, and just having that, like you said, that scene, it's so chilling. It's so it's perfect. His delivery is perfect. The mannerisms as he's telling it, I've never seen that in another, not just a horror movie, but you can take big blockbuster, Oscar-winning performances that you don't see that kind of acting.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and the funny thing is there's all these stories about why Pleasance took the role, and Carpenter was a fan, and he was the second choice after Christopher Lee passed, and Pleasance told Carpenter right off the bat, I'm doing this movie because my daughter liked your first movie, Assault on Precinct 13, and it's like, well, that's great, that's a great coup, but he came in and he treated it like, Donald Pleasance was in The Great Escape. He was, he played Blofeld the first time in a James Bond movie. I mean, he was in these big movies, and he was coming into this little $300,000 movie for peanuts, and he treated it just like anything else. I mean, he was a complete pro, and it comes across in his performance.
One thing I always thought of whenever I was a kid watching this, and it's kind of weird. As a kid, obviously we grew up in the late '80s, early '90s, and Saved by the Bell is a huge show for kids our age. Well, I always remember seeing the name at the end of the credits of Saved by the Bell, Bennett Tramer, and I'm like, where do I know this name from, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, Halloween, man, that's Bennett Tramer. I'm like, what's the connection? Well, then I realized, this guy was a classmate of Carpenter's at USC. Like, how funny is that?
Yeah, I mean, he was Michael's second victim. He's the tow truck guy where Michael gets his coveralls. That's Bennett Tramer.
Right. How cool is that? That's what I love about that movie, man. Just by happenstance, Nick Castle comes in and, oh, hey, why don't you just wear the mask and be the Shape?
What I mean, again, and I talked earlier about the mask and how that just that was such a stroke of luck and genius. And the same thing is Nick Castle. He was just a buddy of John Carpenter's who wanted to come to set because he wanted to be a director too. And Carpenter's just like they didn't even think about who was going to play the Shape, and he's thinking, hey, you should play the killer. And Nick Castle's like, all right, and he just, Carpenter just liked the way he moved, and again, there's a lot of stories about Castle's dad was a dancer, and how much did that influence? It's like that's all great and whatever, but the fact is it comes across in the performance. There's a glide to Nick Castle that I think was really never duplicated until Halloween 2018, and it's just a pace that he has. It's a deliberate, not quite too fast, not quite too slow, but there's a pace and almost a glide to Nick Castle that I think brings so much to that role. That mask does a lot of the heavy lifting, that's true. But I mean, you think of the scene where Lonnie runs into the Shape's arms after they trip Tommy and he crushes his pumpkin. And there's that famous tracking shot along the Shape going along the fence, and he's just sort of gliding along there. I mean, that I actually rewound that last night when I was rewatching it, because I was like, oh man, I got to watch that again, because that is just so good. It's so good.
I agree, and we'll talk about. I kind of want to talk about ranking maybe each of the Michaels in order toward the end of the show, but I totally agree with you. A lot of them were a little bit too forced, a little bit too robotic, a little bit too. I know everybody wanted to put their own spin on it, but ultimately you kind of got to keep it close to that original. You know what I mean? I know it's all going in different directions and different stories, and okay, it's been this many years, whatever. But some of the guys just kind of, to me, it was a little bit too forced. And I know, listening to interviews and talking to a lot of the guys, that I never really watched it. I wanted to put my own spin on it, so I never saw any of the previous versions of it. But Nick stands head and shoulders above the rest, and it's not even close. I know you kind of get that nostalgic feel of, he was the first one, so of course you're going to think he's the best. And a lot of times that rings true, but this is just a perfect example of that. His is it's so smooth, it's just so much more scary. And again, the guy's just wearing a mask and walking, but the way he portrays that, it's like, this guy freaks me out.
Well, I think so much of that comes in how Carpenter envisioned, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill envisioned The Shape, because it's, it almost feels weird saying Michael Myers, because he's not Michael Myers.
Mm-hmm.
Carpenter sees The Shape as he's not a man. He's not a human being anymore. He's a force of nature. He compared him to the shark from Jaws. So there's a way that Castle moves when he's in the coveralls, when he's in the mask, that's not quite human. I mean, it's not robotic, like you said, it's not robotic, but it's almost as if like someone's mimicking a human being. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way to put it. I totally agree with that. And I think reading the stories, when we're getting back to Castle kind of showing up and wanting to be on there, I think from what I've heard, they give him like $25 a day, something like that, to play the Shape.
Oh yeah, peanuts.
Isn't that crazy? But all these years later, and Nick finally doing more and more conventions, I've had the opportunity to meet him multiple times, and it's like, man, it's just seeing the dude. It's like nobody ever sees your face. But to us horror fans and us Halloween fans, like you're the man. You're you are it. After Carpenter, probably, and Curtis, obviously, but Nick is probably third in line of most iconic people in that when you talk about Halloween.
Oh yeah, and it just happened. It's for all those people. It's like the planets aligning for all of those really talented people to come together to make this movie. John Carpenter, Deborah Hill, Dean Cundey, Jamie Lee Curtis, Donald Pleasance, Tommy Lee Wallace. I mean, Tommy Lee Wallace played the Shape in a couple scenes. It was really just it's amazing how it all came together.
And then, after he's done killing people, 15, 20 years later, he goes on to make Major Pain. How about that?
And Dennis the Menace, which always cracks me up, too.
Oh, isn't that funny? It's like, the same Nick Castle? But that's pretty cool, though.
Yeah.
Any gripes with the movie? Anything you look at and obviously you watched, I'm sure you've seen this movie 100 times, but anything you nitpick on and go, I wish they didn't do this, or I wish they didn't do that?
With this one, no. This is probably the only one in the series that I don't have any gripes with. I mean, I feel like this one, I think if I nitpicked a little bit more, like seeing the palm trees in the background, I was like, man, it would have been cool if they could have actually shot in the Midwest or something like that. But, it was a low-budget movie. They did what they could. I think they get the feel right. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, outside of that, I think the cast is pretty good. Of course, it's shot really well. The score is awesome. I mean, it's just such a tight script. I really don't have any. With this one, I don't have any gripes.
Yeah, me too, man. I'm with you. I could watch it. I could watch it every week. Honestly, as stupid as that sounds, put that on every week and watch it and find something new. Find a little nuance that a character does that you never really noticed. Yeah. It's like, man, it's kind of like, to me, it's kind of like the TV show Seinfeld. I could watch that. I could watch every episode again and pick out little things that I missed previously. Like, it might be the way Kramer walks, or it might be the way George delivered this line. It's like, oh my God, that's flawless and hilarious.
Yeah, for me, the sign of a movie that really affects me is its rewatchability. And I rewatch movies a lot. I like to pick them apart and, really study them. It's just something I get a lot of joy out of. And there's a handful of movies that I could literally rewatch every week, like you said, and never get sick of them. And Halloween is right there at the top of the list. I mean, it's it just does it for me, and I never ever get sick. At least of this one, the first one, I never get sick of it.
Yeah, have you been able to go out and to Pasadena and go through any of the filming locations or anything?
Years ago, actually, it was like 19 years ago, almost 19 years ago, December of 2000. I was out there. You probably remember a family that lived in Wellston, John and Frida Smith. They owned the Chambers building. They had the furniture store. Their son Troy lives in California, and he has since like 1999. And I went out there to visit him, and that was one thing I really wanted to do. And I didn't go to all the locations just because I was so jet lagged the entire time I was there that I was on another plane of existence, really. But I did go to Orange Grove, and I got to see the Wallace House and the Doyle House, and that was like so cool. But it wasn't in my head. I just wasn't thinking properly. I should have asked to go see the Myers house, and I just haven't. I just didn't.
It's such a cool thing. I've been out to Halloween, and I've talked to you about this before, but I've been out to H35 and H40, the reunions that they do every 5 years.
Yeah.
And I've taken the tour both times. Sean Clark puts it on, and there's usually four huge Greyhound buses that go, and there's 200 people or so taking these tours and walking through these neighborhoods in Pasadena, and you got neighbors looking at you like, what are you guys doing? Because we're walking through alleys, or it's pretty crazy. But it's so neat to see how much of that film was shot so close together. Like you said, Orange Grove, there's so much stuff filmed on those streets. And
it blew my mind how close those homes were to Sunset Boulevard. I mean, if you just turned the camera around, there's Sunset Boulevard.
Right. Isn't that the first time we took the turn in that big old Greyhound bus? And we were, like you said, you're right there. It's like, what the heck?
Yeah.
But the first time I took the tour for 35 in 2013, we actually had Charles Cyphers was with us, Brian Andrews, Tommy Lee Wallace. I can't remember who else. The boy who played the flashback to Michael in Halloween 4. Preston. Well, shoot, I can't remember his name right off, but he was there, and it was just cool to go back, and Cyphers and Andrews took pictures with us in front of the Doyle house, and we got in front of the hardware store, and Cyphers was doing some of the dialogue, and it was so cool to see. Tommy Lee Wallace went with us to the cemetery and was taking pictures in front of where Judith's grave would have been dug up. Like, it was just so cool to see that. We got to walk with Dick Warlock, and he walked us the same path that Michael took, as he ran into the kid with the boombox, which Billy Warlock, he ran into him, and here's what Lori's at the Haddonfield Memorial, and he kind of walks that whole path up through there with us, and he started crying. Like, this meant so much to him,
right?
To see all of us there, and him retracing those steps, so many years later, 35 years later, 30 years later, whatever. He was in tears, and it was really cool to see that it means that much to them, because it means so much to us too. It's like, wow, this is really a family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, you get that. I mean, from the interviews that I've read and seen, you definitely get that there's meaning to it.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we can get together for the 45th here in a few years and plan something out and head out, because I think you would dig it. All that stuff's so close. One of my goals too is to venture off a little bit more and see a lot of the Back to the Future filming locations, which are pretty close to that area, not too far away.
Oh yeah, they have to be.
But there's also, the Church from the Fog is right there. Pee Wee Herman's house is right there close. There's just so much stuff that was filmed right in that area. You're like, wait a minute.
Right.
I remember this so-and-so. But, all right, man, well, let's move on to Halloween 2. Picking up right where the first one left off. Obviously, Carpenter didn't want to come back and direct, so they turned it over to Rick Rosenthal, who I thought did a pretty good job in this one. A little bit too much gore, I think, compared to the first one. Really not any blood at all. Then this one you come in and needles to eyeballs and burnt faces in hot tubs and things like that I don't think was needed, but I know they were kind of trying to go in the same vein as, now Friday the 13th's out there, and you have all these other slasher movies that are kind of up in that gore factor. Overall, I thought Rosenthal did a really good job with part two. How about you?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Oddly enough, I believe, if I'm remembering right, Halloween 2 was the first Halloween movie I saw. Probably around 89, 90, if, again, you brought up the fact that we grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, USA Up All Night was a big thing. And that's where I saw Halloween 2 for the first time was on USA Up All Night, hosted by Gilbert Gottfried, of all people. Holy moly. But, yeah, and it was weird because it just struck me because it's got a lot of the same aesthetics to the original Halloween, but it does, it ups the ante when it comes to the gore. And, overall, I think, Halloween 2 holds a special place in my heart just because, nostalgia is part of that. But I think it gets more right than it does wrong. I mean, Carpenter's update of the score with Alan Howarth, the first time, I think it's the first time he's working with Alan Howarth. Maybe Escape from New York might have been the first, but anyway, this is the first Halloween movie Alan Howarth's working on, and there's just a bit of an update on the score that sounds really cool. Throwing in some organs instead of just the synthesizers, that makes it sound really cool. Halloween 2, I think, is a worthy follow up to the original.
I think I like how it picks up right from the start. A couple little snafus at the beginning. Obviously, you go back and watch it. Loomis fires 7 shots instead of 6. A little snafu that wasn't picked up kind of in production there, I guess. Right. You see Michael falling out of the front of the house instead of the back of the house. Just little things like that. But you talked about the score. That's one thing I had written down. I wasn't a huge fan of the score. It was almost, like you said, it was updated, but I don't feel like it necessarily needed that. To me, it was a little bit too electronic, kind of. It almost was that precursor to 3, where 3 was just like part 2 on steroids as far as the score goes, to me anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely some little things there at the very beginning of the movie that sort of throw you off. But I think the greatest point of consistency with Halloween 2 is bringing in Dean Cundey. I've said, and I believe this more and more as I get a little older and just sort of my taste between the films changes. I think Dean Cundey is the real star of Halloween 2. There's a real consistency with the cinematography, the use of the Panaglide, the Steadicam there at the beginning with Michael walking through the alleyways. There's some really great mood setting. I think my favorite shot in the entire movie is Michael standing behind Mr. and Mrs. Elrod in her kitchen when when Robert Mundy says, and he's still believed to be at large in Haddonfield, and you see him standing back there. That's such an amazing shot. And you talk about goosebumps. I just got goosebumps here talking about that. But, and that's my favorite thing about Halloween 2 is the world building. With it, it really makes Haddonfield seem like this real lived-in community. You get to meet these different people, a lot of them victims, but you get to meet these different people throughout the community that are sort of reacting to these terrible events that have already happened. And that's kind of the cool thing is, it's a little bit different now, but, especially I think for us growing up in a small town, I kind of appreciated that. It was kind of like, oh, yeah, these people know one another. When they're saying, oh, that happened on Orange Grove, that's right down the street, we probably knew these people. And you're like, yeah, growing up in a small town, if something this terrible like what happened, in Haddonfield, Illinois happened, you would probably know the folks. So I really appreciated that they sort of touched on that and really made that part of the story.
Good point. Yeah, I agree with that. I think he did a very good job with that, making it a small town feel. And how cool, cool little snippet, which obviously but this is kind of the debut in a movie of Dana Carvey, right?
Yeah.
Dana Carvey as the little assistant to the newscaster there. I'm sure most people don't pick that up, but it's like, hey, wait a minute, that is him. I went back and watched that one. I think it was last night when I texted you,
Yeah.
and I was watching it too. And it's one of those things where you have to kind of pause it a little bit and be like, okay, I can tell that's him. You know, obviously very young Dana Carvey, but that's him.
Yeah, fun little bit of trivia. That reporter and her cameraman were supposed to have larger roles, and and I don't know if they ever shot them, but they were in a script that I read years and years ago. That is how they encounter Michael on their way to the hospital, because they find out that Lori's at the hospital. They want to go there and interview this last survivor. Their news van breaks down, and as they're sitting on the side of the road, the Shape comes in and dispatches them, no pun intended there, but takes them out, and that's something that they cut. I don't know if they ever shot it, but that was definitely in a script at one point.
Oh, very cool. That would have been cool to see all the alternate stuff or stuff that was shot. I hope there's more of that out there that they kind of put out over the years. I know there's a lot Halloween 5 that was thought to be lost, and hopefully that kind of, I think they did some had some articles come out last year that they think they found the footage. So hopefully that stuff kind of comes out. I know they've talked to Don Shanks about it, about different, death scenes that he remembers filming that just never saw the light of day. So hopefully more and more of this stuff will come out.
I think so, yeah. Fingers crossed.
So with 2, the Jimmy and Bud character, man, obviously Lance Guest, I really like Lance Guest, but Leo Rossi, I think, they're kind of like Laurel and Hardy. You know what I mean? They're kind of like, I don't know. They're a good duo. I think they play well off each other. But I think Rossi's just fantastic. And then obviously I like him from River's Edge. But I think those two were cast really well. I think they played off each other well. I think Rossi's kind of brash, kind of expletive filled. His funny song about Amazing Grace that. Yeah, and I heard he just made that up. Like, I guess they told him from something I read a couple weeks ago, or I saw a video. They were talking to him, and he said, "Man, we want you to sing a song." And somebody had heard him singing this on set before, or something like that. And he's like, "Why don't I sing this?" And he did, and they stuck with it. Did you hear that same thing about the whole Amazing Grace portion of the film?
Something like that, yeah. And you're right. That's one thing that and especially those two, Leo Rossi and Lance Guest, is they sort of help the movie with that sort of small town working class sort of vibe to it, because Leo Rossi especially feels like a dude that, if you grew up in a small town and it had a hospital, it's a guy that had worked there forever and was probably bored and kind of a jerk, and but he was fun to be around, and he totally gets that. But a lot of that, and there's so many of those different actors throughout, especially from the hospital staff, because Rick Rosenthal sort of was he had directed a lot of theater, and he taught acting classes too. And a lot of those folks that were cast in the hospital roles, the nurses, the doctors, they were from his acting troupe. So he knew these people. That's why you have, they're kind of, on the page, nothing roles, but they sort of do a lot with what they're given. So someone like, who's playing Dr. Mixter or Janet, a lot of those folks, they're giving pretty memorable and thorough performances with not a lot, because they're these great actors that's trusted Rosenthal from the beginning. And I think a lot of that has helped the film in retrospect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they did well, like you said, with the material they were given. I think they really did well. I think Bud and Jimmy both just stand out. Even all these years later, I know a lot of people still crap on 2 for some reason. I don't get it. I really like the film. There were a couple things that I was just like the hospital setting. I mean, you got 3 nurses, no other patients. There's nobody there. It's dark and dingy. Like, I work in a hospital. It's like, that's not how even a small town hospital is not going to be that barren. So that's one tiny little issue I had with. It's like, there's going to be more people in there. So I know extras cost money and whatever, but let's maybe fill that up with at least a few more folks.
Yeah. I am I'm going to go ahead and give my first hot take of the podcast, and that's, and this, I know this could be controversial amongst Halloween fandom, but I don't think Dick Warlock is that great of a Michael Myers. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Okay, that's totally understandable. I think, oh man, it's funny because I wrote down a couple things about the different Michaels and how I was going to rank them, and I actually, going back and watching it yesterday, there are certain things I like. I think he's obviously a little more slow, a little more methodical than Nick Castle's shape was. Obviously, he's a lot smaller, so it's going to look a little bit different. I didn't hate it. I don't think he was the best. I think he's maybe, I don't know, top 3 or 4. But I'm with you. I don't think he was the best. I liked certain scenes. The scene of him walking down the stairs, just kind of like this robotic, looking straight ahead, not even looking down at the stairs to see where you're going. When he's coming to Jamie at the end, I like that. But having met Dick, it's hard to like. He's such a grandpa. Like, he's such just that guy that you want to spend, so much time with. Just such a nice gentleman, like super sweet guy. So it's hard, having met most of the cast of most of these movies now. It's like, it's hard to say anything bad about their performance. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, and I think that, he's not bad at all. It's such a different take on the character because he's much slower than it's like. I think if he had sped up a little bit, he could have still got it, but I don't know what it was. He just really has a much slower approach to the shape, and I don't know. I think it really all comes down to personal preference, I think, between Dick Warlock and Nick Castle. Dick Warlock is not bad in the role at all. I mean, the mask still looks different on his face than on Nick Castle's, but it still looks cool. And he still has an ominous threat to him, especially, and it does have that great scene, we touched on earlier, where he bumps into actually Dick Warlock's own son, the kid with the boombox on his shoulder. And there's that great tracking shot behind the shape as he's walking, and he walks past the Haddonfield Memorial Hospital sign. That's a great scene. That's actually my favorite scene in Halloween 2, the entire thing. But again, it just all comes back to personal taste a little bit.
I think too, one thing I have, and I know they filmed a couple alternate endings to this, but I think in the regular ending that we see, like, where's Jimmy? Like, what happened to Jimmy? He's just hanging out in that car. Is he alive? What happened with him? I know there was an alternate scene. Lance Guest has talked about it. They shot it, and he ended up being in the back of the ambulance with Laurie, but ultimately they felt like it kind of took, like, the focus should just be on Laurie, not on this secondary character who's been in the movie 20 minutes in a sequel. So I definitely understand why they didn't include that one in there, but it's almost like you kind of want to see something with him, like maybe him standing up waiting by the ambulance, or her asking, hey, is Jimmy okay? He's okay. Okay, we get a definitive. Instead, he's just kind of hanging out in the car. The guy was concussed. The guy slipped on a ridiculous amount of blood and hit his head, but it's like, what happened to Jimmy?
Yeah, there's no real closure for the character. I mean, I can remember being a kid and watching, Halloween 2 the countless times I did. I always assumed that Jimmy was dead. And it never felt like, it kind of felt like, did they really mean for him to die? Because it's kind of, for a movie that, like you said, had sort of upped the ante on the gore quote, that wasn't a very gory death. I mean, the most blood he really had on him was the blood that splashed up onto his cheek when he falls. So yeah, there was really what really happened to Jimmy, in that theatrical cut.
We'll go back to, we were talking about Warlock, and the scene, obviously, he, being the stunt man, and he filmed this scene where, hey, he's at the end, he's set on fire and he's walking out of the flames, that's a cool shot. And I know he was always proud of that, and he said it held for a long time. I think he said it held like some kind of record for being set on fire, or continuous motion or something like that. But as I went back and watched it again and kind of nitpicked some things, it's like, man, you know how thin Dick Warlock was in that role.
Yeah.
You come back now and you see, oh gosh, look how huge he looks because he's so, you know, he's got the burn suit on and he's so padded up.
Yeah.
It just, to me, I was like, I didn't need to see maybe that close of a shot on it because you can really tell how much padding is on him right there.
Yeah, he kind of looks like the Michelin Man.
Exactly, man. Okay,
Well,
but
like-
overall, I think two was a good was a good effort.
Yeah.
Did they
And,
need to? Go ahead.
I think we can't move on yet without talking about the elephant in the room when it comes to number 2, and I think that's making the plot point of making Lori Michael's sister.
Right.
Yeah.
That's I'm sure you've heard over the years that Carpenter was like, man, there's nowhere else to go with the story. He's like, I got to do something, I guess. So let's just here we go. We'll make him the sister, and that was kind of. Do we need that? I don't think we needed it. I think we could have just ran with the fact of, okay, this guy's a killer. He obviously is honed in on this victim, and he hasn't killed her yet, so that's why he's following her. He doesn't have to be following her because, like you said, he's not human. He doesn't have emotion. He doesn't have feelings. He's a force of nature. Like, just let him do what he does.
Yeah. And and the older I get, when I was in junior high or high school, and I was just like, oh my God, just foaming at the mouth for the series, just like loved everything there could be about Halloween. It didn't bother me, but the older I get, the more I appreciate, especially the first one for what it is actually that plot twist in Halloween 2 of making Lori Michael's sister makes the first movie less scary because. It gives Michael motive, and again, like you said, it makes him more human. It gives him a motive or a reason for what he's doing. The fact, and if you just watch Halloween for just what it is, the reason that I, just looking at it that way, Halloween is its own singular movie. The reason Lori, the reason he fixated on Lori is, she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was dropping off keys at the Myers house. When he was there, he saw her. She happens to look like Judith, and that's it. I mean, that's it. And he just pointed at her, and he's like, her. There's no rhyme or reason to it. And that is, the randomness of his crimes. I mean, the randomness of any crime, is what's scary to people. And once you put motive behind it, then it makes you understand a little bit more. And I think with Halloween, we don't really need to understand.
That's a big reason I can't do zombies Halloweens. I don't need that Michael backstory. I don't need to know, oh, this kid was, abused and neglected. And,
Right.
I don't need stuff. Not to mention just the lazy writing and Rob's a lazy writer, dude. I can't. The dialogue is just so bad in his movies, and there's a couple movies that I like of his, but that's on another soapbox. We'll talk about those in a little bit. But I'm with you. I think it does make it a little bit less scary as far as, oh, okay, well, this is why he was after her. I don't need that. I don't need to know that. Let's just, okay, here's a killer. He's coming to kill. That's all I need to know.
Yep, that's where I'm at.
All right, man. Well, let's skip over part 3, just because we'll talk about it a little bit, but in the continuity of Michael Myers, The Shape, he has nothing to do with part 3. So, they take a couple years off till he finally comes back in '88 with Halloween 4. Halloween 4 remains one of my top. It might be my second favorite in the series. I don't know if it was because of the period. It's the late 80s, and just anything from that time to me had that feel of, obviously, we were kids then. So I think that's why Rocky 4 is one of my favorites. It's like just anything from that time period, the way it was shot, the way, everything looked, the clothes, everything like that to me screams like, nostalgia for us as a kid. But I really dug part 4. I felt like they kind of misled everything a little bit with the poster showing, the Michael in the, original mask. They have the original house on the poster, and then you see the movie and you're like, well, wait a minute, we're filming in a totally different state with a, pretty controversial mask that comes into play that we'll talk a little bit about. But overall, what are your thoughts on part 4?
It's weird because I'm kind of in the same boat as you are a little bit. The part 4, probably when I was a kid, was my second most watched one after part 2. It was pretty brand spanking new. It came out in 1988. It was a hit. It's well directed. I mean, Dwight Little did a really good job with the movie itself. It's kind of the point in the series where I do start to nitpick quite a bit, and it's funny that you mentioned the mask, because I saw a pretty funny meme going around last week where, on the right hand side, it showed the poster, and it showed the mask, and it's the classic mask from the first one, and then on the second side it shows what we actually got, and it's like, did they buy that at a Kmart? I mean, it looks so bad. It's one of my least favorite in the series. I mean, there's a lot of bad masks in the series, but it really feels like they put in zero effort to it.
That's what I'm thinking. It's like, man, you got the K&B guys, Greg Nicotero, you got these, Robert Kurtzman, you got these guys who are, they do this stuff. You would think they could come in and, hey, let's make a mask that at least resembles it. The only way this resembled it is it was, rubber and a mask. Like, it looks nothing else like the original. The opening montage of this one, I think, is brilliant. I think those shots of the tractor and those shots of the little, the guy with the pumpkin head sitting on the tractor, and I just think that whole opening montage was really cool.
Yeah, the opening itself has a ton of really great atmosphere, and it's kind of, it's weird because this was the first movie in the entire Halloween series, even including Halloween 3, that didn't shoot in California. It was the first one to shoot in Utah, in Salt Lake City, Utah. So it was kind of amazing to watch how they sort of did the atmosphere going from there. And I think that's one thing that Halloween 4 does have a lot of is atmosphere, and it works out pretty well for it. That opening credit sequence does a really good job of sort of setting the tone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I guess my first big thing with that, like you said, moving to a different place, it's going to be hard to find, different craftsman style houses necessarily in Utah, and you end up making the Myers house this big Victorian type place. And the fifth one, the same thing. They just taken a different direction. It's like, what? Wonder why they went with the house like that. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
House. At least you think you could at least find something similar. I know you can't necessarily go out and build a facade and spend a whole bunch of money building like a replica of the outside of the house or whatever, but you would think you could find something at least a little bit more resembling the original Myers house instead of taking it completely in a different direction.
Yeah, and the production design there, it felt like, kind of an afterthought, and just even the kind of the look. And that's probably one of my least favorite things of Halloween 4 is that they sort of didn't do the classic scope aspect ratio, sort of that look that Halloween was known for looking. So they sort of filmed it in a different aspect ratio, what is known as the flat, the 1:8:5. For those of you who aren't really sure, the scope aspect ratio gives more of the black bars on the top and bottom of your TV when you're watching the movie that's filmed in scope, and the flat, fills more of the screen. So, you sort of have a little bit less of a visual look to the movie. So, that was one thing that sort of always sort of stuck out to me about Halloween 4.
You were talking about a hot take last time with your Dick Warlock. I'll go kind of a step further with this one. I know a lot of people love George Wilbur. George came back part 6, obviously. He was in part 4. I'm not a huge fan of George's portrayal. I don't know. I can't really pinpoint a specific reason. Obviously, he's a lot bulkier of the 3 so far. Different shape. The mask, is completely different, but it's also going to fit his head differently. Just his movements to me they weren't as robotic as some of the later guys who played Michael, but they were almost too robotic in certain points. And when he's getting shot at the end, I'm like, dude, that's terrible. That's terrible acting, man. It's I don't know. It just didn't look right to me. I don't know. What's your take on George as the shape in 4?
I'm on the same boat as you are. Not a huge Wilbur fan in 4. The look doesn't look great. And I know that they put hockey pads on him for some reason to bulk him up a little bit, which I'll never understand. But again, this was 1987 that they were filming this movie. And by this point, we were coming to an end of the slasher craze. Kane Hodder was already playing Jason Voorhees, and Kane was a really big, bulky guy. So, you had that maybe people were looking for. And I don't really like the way that he moves. It almost, I don't know. It is hard to pinpoint. It's getting into that robotic kind of movement that we were going to get from the last couple of Michaels, and it felt like he was too self-aware when he was playing the role.
I think my favorite shot in the entire movie is not even George as Michael. It's Tom Morga in the gas station when he's bandaged up and Loomis steps in, and just that when he turns and the camera just zooms right in on Michael, all bandaged up, standing in the doorway. That gives me chills. I was like, oh man, that's one of the best scenes to me in the entire series. And why they went away from Morga, who obviously, I think he has a distinction of the only guy to play Leatherface, Jason, Michael, which is pretty cool. But I don't know why, what he was doing that wasn't good enough, or why they got rid of him or only used him for certain scenes. But I really dug that scene in the gas station.
Yeah, it's really, really good. That's a really effective scene. And I will say this, giving Wilbur some credit, there is one scene in the movie which I really, really love, which is that infamous shotgun scene. That is really, really well shot. And there's when he impales Kelly Meeker with that shotgun through the wall, which is a really cool. I mean, it's not a very, it's not a kind of kill that you associate Michael Myers with. But it's like, all right, I got to give them, points for creativity. But when he just sort of stands there and is like breathing and looking at her, it's one of the few shots in the movie where the mask looks kind of cool.
Mm-hmm. I agree. That's a good kill. Again, the coming up the stairs while Brady's fumbling with the shotgun, that was kind of a cool scene. But even when he's downstairs and he kind of walks and he's parallel with him before he turns to look at him, just that whole thing looks so robotic and almost like a soldier who's coming to attention as he turns his body and looks at him. And I'm like, to me, it's like too forced. It's not, again, comparing everybody to that Nick Castle, which it's not fair, but you compare everybody to that, and like you said, that glide, and George to me just didn't have it, and the bulky look, I didn't understand that, but I guess looking back, like you said too, you had Kane Hodder, who at this point had played Jason a few times, and he's really a bulked up guy, so I guess I can see why they're doing that. They want to make everything bigger and better and bloodier and all that as they go along, but George definitely wasn't my favorite of the Michaels by far.
No, I'm right there with you, especially in 4. Again, I felt like maybe he wasn't doing his own thing, and I think like the successful shapes have always sort of been left to their own devices and just did their thing. I mean, Nick Castle did his thing, Dick Warlock did his thing, James Courtney did his thing. So I think that's maybe he was just getting too much direction. It was like, oh, we need you to be slower. We need you to be, it felt like he was doing a bad impersonation of Dick Warlock from Halloween 2, to be honest.
Yeah, I totally agree. What did you think of the introduction of, Jamie Lloyd as Laurie's daughter? Did you like how they kind of were able to write, Jamie Lee Curtis out and, showing pictures and kind of doing some backstory there? Did you like that fact? Do you wish they would have went into a entirely different direction as far as, okay, why is Michael stalking this girl, or do you think it was necessary? I think it was probably necessary after telling the story of 2, where Michael is, Laurie's brother. So I think it makes more sense as to why he's chasing this little girl in 4. Obviously, if you never would have told that story in 2, it most likely would have went into, to a different direction.
Well, they had kind of written themselves into a corner with the whole family aspect. For 2, it kind of made sense. to a degree, Laurie looks very much like Judith, and he's just kind of fixated, on this. And as far as Carpenter was concerned, 2 was going to be the end of the Michael Myers story. He wasn't involved with Halloween 4, so whatever. So going forward, at the time whenever I was really into Halloween 4, none of that bothered me. I thought that was great. Danielle Harris is really, really good as Jamie Lloyd, really fantastic young actress. So she sells a lot of what, she's going through, the drama, the terror. Ellie Cornell as her sister works really, really well. It's an almost across the board, pretty well cast movie. Sasha Jensen, is really cool as Brady. You'd come to really enjoy him later, a couple years later in Dazed and Confused. He was pretty awesome in. So, that sort of stuff I like, now watching it and I'll be honest, it's not a movie I revisit much, anymore, because there are some things that I disliked about it, George Wilbur being one. The mask just stinks. And then even that weird thing where that one shot in the school where the mask with the blonde hair shows up because supposedly someone grabbed the wrong mask from the truck is just absolutely bizarre to me. But Donald Pleasance is he's selling it again. It's really cool to see. Dr. Loomis with burned and even more kind of cracked. That we're really used to. The guy that plays Meeker, I think it's Beau Starr, is really, really solid. They do a good job, I think, with that continuation. Credit where credit is due. They do a continuation of sort of making Haddonfield feel like a lived-in community, like Halloween 2 did. So that I do appreciate. But it feels much more like your typical slasher movie. It doesn't quite, to me, especially now, doesn't quite feel like a Halloween movie.
After rewatching it this week, for some reason, still with me, it still resonates as I'm like, I still dig this one. I think Ellie Cornell and Danielle Harris played really well together. And I was so glad that they kept both of those characters alive, through that movie. And, then you get into the next movie, and we'll talk about that next. But I thought making Ellie Cornell such a big character in this movie was a good thing, because I think the whole thing was well cast. Obviously the Kathleen Kinmont, you got to have the she's kind of the stereotypical, okay, once you see her in that shop, she's dying. You can just tell. Any other part of the story, it's like that girl, she kind of exudes that sexuality, you know what I mean? Like, she's not making it through this movie. I would like to see Wade get his comeuppance. I would like to see that, because he seemed kind of like a jerk. But we don't see any more of him, right? From that, in the store there where they're, he's trying to get the date with Kelly. So I would like to see him a little bit more on that. But overall, I dug it. It's not 1 or 2 as far as that goes. George, as I said before, George isn't my favorite Michael. Not to take anything away from him, because I think he does a great job. But if I have to compare, he's not my go-to. I'm not going to go after him. And hey, if I'm going to hire somebody to play Michael, it's not going to be George.
Yeah, it's definitely not like the bottom of the barrel of the series, not even close. But it's definitely middle rung. It's because it's interesting. It's the first in the series at all that had no participation from John Carpenter, Deborah Hill, Dean Cundy, Tommy Lee Wallace, any of those folks. I mean, this was a whole. I mean, basically, it was Mustafa Akkad, and that was it.
Man, thank God for Mustafa, right? I mean, how many times? This probably would have ended after 2 if not for Mustafa, right? I mean, it's the love that guy had for Michael. He's like, whatever, you can do whatever, but you cannot kill Michael. I mean, thank God he was a part of this.
He's definitely the godfather of the Halloween franchise.
I thought Danielle Harris, being, I don't know, what was she, 10 or 11 maybe at the time? I thought she was really, really good. I thought there were certain scenes where you can't really pick on a kid actor. I mean, when we were 10 or 11, I couldn't even, talk in class, let alone get up and shoot a movie. So you know what I mean? But I thought she did an overall really, really good job. I thought she kind of regressed, I guess maybe because of the material that she was given in part 5. But I thought part 4, she was excellent. She did a great job playing that scared, like, oh my God, like you really believe this dude was coming after her and was going to kill her.
Right. I mean, and she plays it. There's two different sets of sort of trauma and or drama this kid is playing. It's the fact that she's an orphan now, that she lost her mother and father at an early age, and then the fact that people know in this town that she is directly descended that she is related to this maniacal killer, and then the fact that he is coming after her again. So there's like these 3 layers to it, and she really does make it believable, without just being, because a normal kid that age would just be like a wreck, and you wouldn't want to watch a real kid like that in one of these movies. But she brings a bit of a gravitas to it that really allows you as an adult to sort of latch onto that, say, I completely get what she's gone through.
Just want to go back and clarify from earlier. I was talking about the kid that was on the bus tour with us, and his name's Eric Preston. It just came to my mind. He's the kid that played the flashback when Jamie's in front of there putting on the costume, and she kind of sees a flashback to Michael when he was little and that kind of thing. But it was Eric Preston. I just wanted to kind of clarify that. As far as the ending, what were your thoughts on the ending when they're trying to turn, possibly, Jamie into the killer? Is she going to take Michael's spot in the next, in Halloween 5? She stabs her mom. What causes that to happen? Obviously we get the starting of the Man in Black. Give me your thoughts on that.
I think even at an early age, I was jaded enough to know that there's no way they're going to make her the killer. Michael is their cat, that iconic mask. I knew, because I think at that point there were by the time Halloween 4 came out, I think there were already at least 7 Friday the 13th movies out, because they were just chucking those movies out like they were or McDonald's hamburgers. So I think even then I knew that it was a cool twist of an ending, and I don't know how it played in the theaters in 1988 when that movie came out, but for me, seeing it for the first time on VHS, I was like, oh, that's really cool. This is a really exciting way to end the movie, but there's no chance she's the killer in the next one.
Right. I know they from what I've read, they had thoughts of making that, possibly making her the killer. And like you said, man, it's like, no way. And then I think once they saw the box office receipts and how well this one did, which is obvious with how quickly they went into production for part 5 and put it out a year later, there's no way you can take that away from Michael. It's like, that's what people want to see. And, coming off of part 3, which was a really good movie, it still doesn't, has Michael in it, but it has him in it on a commercial, walking down the stairs chasing Laurie from Halloween. People were just clamoring for that. Man, Michael's the killer. This is what we want to see. It's like having can you imagine if they did a Friday the 13th now? Obviously the first one, as everybody knows, isn't about Jason. I mean, it's his mother, right? So, but could you imagine if they did a Friday the 13th part, I don't know what they're on now, it'd be, I guess, part 11 if you don't count the reboots, and there was no Jason in it. Can you imagine having that in the backlash?
Well, I mean, Jason Goes to Hell is very much kind of like that. I mean, he's only in the hockey mask and in the true form of what you think of as Jason in the very beginning of the movie and the very end of the movie. So that's kind of what Jason Goes to Hell is, and I think that's why that's a movie that you don't really see very many Friday the 13th fans talk about, because I feel like it's sort of the redheaded stepchild of the series, even more so than Friday the 13th Part 5, which it's not Jason. It's a guy in a hockey mask running around hacking people up, but it's not Jason Voorhees. Say that the fun thing is we're talking about Halloween 4 and what the possibilities could have been for Halloween 4, and there was a point in time when Carpenter was going to be involved, and he commissioned a script. And right off, the top of my head, I can't remember who wrote that, but it was dealing with Michael Myers had almost become like this embodiment and evil. It was more of a supernatural tale, and it involved I believe Cypher's Brackett was a pretty large character in the movie, and it was a much more supernatural tale about Haddonfield and sort of like the evil of Michael Myers that has sort of polluted this town. And supposedly, I have not read the script. I guess it's available online, but it's supposedly pretty good. And that would have been a very interesting take on the material going forward.
What are your thoughts about the supernatural stuff? Like, I've never been a huge fan of sci-fi type stuff. But ironically, I was a fan of Friday the 13th Part 6, which gets stabbed and comes back to life from the lightning, like Jason Lives. I was like, man, I really dug that one. And actually, in the whole series, that's probably my first or second favorite, and C.J. Graham is my favorite. I know I'll take backlash from Kane fans. Obviously, I love Kane to death, but C.J. Graham is my favorite portrayal of Jason in that entire series. But as far as the supernatural stuff, clearly Michael's not human. We get that at this point, but I'm kind of glad they didn't go in a direction like, oh, okay, he's electrocuted and brought back to life. Or to me, I don't dig those. The telekinetic stuff with what was that, Friday the 13th Part, was that 5 or 7?
That's 7.
Yeah, 7. So I just don't dig that. I don't get it. Obviously these movies aren't real and they're not meant to be, you're not supposed to be like, that could never happen. Well, clearly, this stuff couldn't happen. He couldn't get shot 6 times. He couldn't get lit on fire. He couldn't get all, I get all that. But there's just something different about that supernatural stuff to me that kind of pushes me away and makes me go, I'm not sure I want to watch that.
Well, it's funny because the Halloween series is really the one that never quite even touched on that subject. I mean, when it came to Michael Myers, even when you're going forward with Curse of Michael Myers, they never really touch on why he's sort of invincible or why he can't be killed. I mean, Friday the 13th with Jason is like Jason died in the final chapter and he was brought back to life. I mean, a Nightmare on Elm Street, he's dead in the first movie. He's basically a demon. Those movies sort of already touch on the fact that these are supernatural beings. Halloween just sort of was like, nah, you know what? We're not really interested in touching on that, and it sort of makes it a little confusing. At times it's like, oh, he's just okay. He's just impervious to getting shot a bunch. We're gonna roll with this. They just never really decided they ever wanted to touch on that aspect of Michael's character.
I'm glad they didn't. I'm just glad they're like, okay, this guy, well, he can't be killed, but look, he's had this done. He's been burnt and stabbed and all this stuff, and he can't die. But we don't go that extra mile, like you said, and touch like, hey, okay, he's dead. Well, now how do we bring him back to life? He just always comes back. There's not a reason. There's not, this didn't cause him to. It just, this happened, which was pretty cool. I think that sets him apart from a lot of the other slasher movies.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, man. Well, so overall, your impressions of 4, pretty good. Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs middle. What do you think about 4 overall?
I'd probably still give it a thumbs up. I mean, it's well directed. It's got a really good cast. I mean, I think right there, those put it over the top. I mean, especially with most of these type of slasher movies. Even if I don't like The Mask or George Wilbur's portrayal, I still think overall it's a solid entry in the franchise.
Okay, well, let's move on to number 5. So, I think for a long time until 8 came along, 5 was the one that just got picked apart, man. It was, like I touched on with 4 doing so well at the box office, these guys are like, oh man, there's money to be made. So let's hop back in quickly and let's start on number 5. And I read a thing the other day with it wasn't with Joe Chappelle. Joe Chappelle was from 6, right? Who was from 5 that I read a story from the other day? It wasn't the director.
I'm going to completely botch this guy's name, but it's like Dominic Ofenin Girard.
It wasn't with him. It was with one of the writers, one of the other writers of the movie. And they talked about how they did like script changes pretty much all the time. They didn't know exactly where they were going to go, and it was just rushed into being, rushed into production pretty quickly. But I thought overall this one's it's pretty rough. Even watching it again this week, pretty rough. I didn't like the opening montage of the, just slashing through the pumpkin. It just took way too long. It's like, man, this is like a minute and a half too minutes of, okay, there's a pumpkin getting carved up and we're playing some cool music. Didn't really dig that, but I like how they took. I really love the beginning. Whenever, okay, Michael gets shot, he goes down into the shaft, and before they can blow it up, he comes out into the creek and starts floating down the water. I remember watching that as a kid and being like, man, how cool is that? Like, that's a really cool. I thought the first maybe 15 or 20 minutes was really good, but again, rewatching it, as he's floating down and he gets out, and you can clearly see the life vest under his overalls. He's like, oh man, like, again, it's just that nitpicky thing, but rewatching it the other night, you can see it as clear as day. It's kind of right there. But I thought it was cool. He goes out, he stumbles upon this hermit that lives out in the wilderness or whatever, and this guy kind of takes him in, and then from there, it to me it starts just spiraling downward. Just go ahead and go into it and tell me your thoughts, man, and let me know what you think of this one.
I feel like I don't know. I as a kid, it's weird because this was pre-internet, so we're just like talking amongst ourselves, and in Wellston, Ohio, there was like maybe 4, 5 big Halloween fans. So we would just, and you're the same age. It was like me, you, Ryan Fott, Bob liked these movies. So we all just kind of had the general consensus about what these movies were and what we liked about them. And even then, 5 was the outlier. It was the one I was like, whoa, what happened here? So, and it's so weird. I mean, I can appreciate, because the director, Gerard, is, he's French. So, there's, France is the land of cinema. They take cinema very seriously there. And I can appreciate the way the movie was shot. It's very, it's just dripping in shadows, very much natural light. That I like. I think it has that above Part 4, where 4 is in a way trying to ape Cundy's look and not quite getting there. But there's just so much that's working, and it's not working for it. And one of them is Michael Shanks as the Shape. He's just we talk about George Wilbur being big. Michael Shanks is like Conan the Barbarian, as Michael Myers. It's just bad. He's too big. He's too muscular. I mean, he's got this ponytail that's just plugged into the back of his mask. The mask sucks. I mean, it's like, what in the world were they doing? It looks like it looks like an image from a comic book of Michael Myers that someone did in like Japan, and then they made the mask from that. It's just so bad. A lot of the cast is not good. I know, and I'm sure we'll get there, but poor Wendy Kaplan as Tina. So just, she's been sort of the punching bag in the Halloween franchise for 20 years. And I don't know if she, entirely deserves it, but it's not a well-written character. Danielle Harris being mute through half of the movie, killing off Ellie Cornell through, a quarter way through the movie. I mean, there was like bad decision after bad decision made along the way for this movie.
Dude, with Ellie dying that soon, and I know she's brought up how she kind of, originally they wanted to shove the scissors down her throat and kill her that way, and she's like, no, that's not, this character can't go out like that. Obviously she agreed to come back, but then she's like, we got to change that death, plus I want some more money, from what I heard. So they offered her a little bit of a pay bump, and, they killed her different way, obviously stabbing her kind of in the heart with the scissors, or in the chest with the scissors. But for her to go out being such a strong character in Part 4, and then you bring her into Part 5, and you're basically like, you're secondary, we don't need you. And then bringing in the Tina character, just where did this character come from? Where was she in Part 4? Like, if anything, I would have thought maybe it would have been the Lindsay character from Part 4, Rachel got in the car with, but like, where's this Tina character coming from? That was a bad mistake to kill Ellie off that soon. Danielle the whole, I guess maybe this is where they kind of touched on that, Friday the 13th Part 7 stuff with the telekinetic powers and all that. That I just didn't get that. I didn't. It was so bad. And with Danielle Harris played it the best she could, I think, with the dialogue and the stuff she was given, even though she doesn't really talk for the first, I don't know, 20 or 30 minutes. And then all of a sudden, it's like this girl hasn't talked for a year, but then all of a sudden at the end of the movie, she's just back, chatting away like nobody's business. It's like, okay, don't really get that. And you got the poor kid who played Billy, I think Jeffrey Landman, I think was his name. Same thing with him, man. He gets hit by this car. He's okay, and then what happened? It's kind of like what happened to Jimmy in Part 2. I had read where an interview with him where they said they actually filmed a little different scene where you could clearly see him getting hit, a little bit hard by the car, and you kind of assume that he's dead. They also apparently filmed another scene where he was alive, but they just didn't, for some reason, these didn't make the movie, and you're kind of left, like, what happened to Jimmy? What happened to Billy? Are they alive? Are they dead? What's going on? So I thought they could have touched a little bit better on that. The mask, I don't know. I have no idea what they were doing with that. Kind of looks like Nicolas Cage a little bit. Not really sure what was going on. And you talk about Shanks and how big he is. Again, super nice guy. All these guys I've met as Michael, and I've been lucky enough to meet everybody now who's played Michael. Shanks is super nice, but to this day, he is still huge. I mean, this dude is ripped, just jacked. I'm like, my gosh, that's definitely not, him and Nick Castle are definitely two different looking guys. But I think one big scene that really turns me off of him playing Michael in this entire movie was at the end when he's sitting in the jail cell and he's like not twiddling his thumbs, but he's just kind of like playing with that chain.
He's playing with the chain. Yeah, it's so weird.
Yeah, right? It's like, what? Like, Michael wouldn't do that. He doesn't do anything. He just kind of, that really bothers me. And apparently, over the year break that we had from Michael, the dude that was taking care of him, the old hermit guy, must have put him on the NASCAR circuit and taught him how to drive a car.
Yeah.
As well as because what the heck, man? In this movie, I was like, is that Luke Duke driving that car? Or is that Mike Myers?
Yeah.
When he pulls in at the gas station and like that's just a little bit too much. When he's driving him, driving into the farm at the end, like what? All this stuff, just none of it makes sense. Then you have these two bumbling cops who, what was that?
Oh,
why was that a thing? Like,
dude,
it would have been okay. It would have been okay if their dialogue. But what are you doing with that? With the stupid, sound effects and honking and the what? It's like carnival music in the background. I just didn't understand that.
There's like a slide whistle and like clown shoes. I can remember like years and years ago when I was like really on like Halloween message boards and stuff. They were always referred to as the clown cops, and everyone hated them. And the funniest little thing about one of them is in. One of the clown cops, the blonde guy, is from one of my favorite movies of all time. He is in Die Hard. He plays he plays Harvey, the news anchor in Die Hard.
Really?
Yeah, that's Harvey.
Harvey came a long way, man.
He really did. He went from one year being in Die Hard to the next year being in Halloween 5. And the thing about Halloween 5 is I don't think, I'm going to preface this, I don't think it's the worst in the franchise, but it's definitely the one that feels most like a Friday the 13th sequel.
Yes, I agree. Like I said, it was just so rushed. It just wasn't well done. I don't know what they were thinking. I guess just seeing that money come in from Part 4. One thing I did dig though was the cool mask that Michael put on while he's waiting for Tina when he pulls up and she thinks it's his boyfriend. I dug that big mask. I thought that was pretty cool. And then to see him sitting there in the car with it on, and then when she goes into the gas station, you see him reach in and put the Michael mask back on. I think that's a pretty cool scene. I don't get the cops showing up at the gas station and then all of a sudden this car that was sitting there, they're just going to let that car drive away. and nobody hears it drive away. Yeah, there's just so many misses in that movie. Some good stuff, Pleasance is good. Pleasance, he had. I think if it wasn't for him, if he didn't come back in this one for some reason, I don't know that I could sit through that one again.
I pretty much agree with you. It's a forgettable movie, which is it's kind of the worst thing, Yeah, you when you sit through Halloween Resurrection, it's definitely a worse movie, but you don't forget the pain you just felt for 90 minutes sitting through that movie. Halloween 5 is just so forgettable.
Yeah, another thing with that one is how does Michael get to the farm? Like, how does he know where that farm's at? Like, there's nobody with him, right? He doesn't drive somebody. He's like, how does he just show up? He doesn't have GPS. Like, how's he finding out where this farm's at?
I think, we talked earlier about how there's a lot of footage that was cut out of Halloween 5. I'd say that's probably somewhere on the cutting room floor. I know that, the scene where when they're in the Myers house and they're waiting for Michael to come there and they get this word that, people at the clinic have been killed. There was an entire sequence that was filmed of Michael slaughtering these cops. And I guess that's what comprises a lot of that cut footage. But, maybe there's some connective tissue along the way of other scenes that found its way, cut out for whatever reason.
I hope so. Man, I'd like to see it because hopefully that would bring some of this at least back together a little bit and make it a little bit more understandable.
Yeah.
Fun for this one, which I'm sure you probably know because you know everything about the Halloween movies, but did you know that Bobby Brady, Mike Lookinland, was like additional photography for this movie?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. How about that?
Yeah. He lives in Salt Lake City, Utah, for sure. One of my favorite little roles in this movie is an actor named Troy Evans, who plays Deputy Charlie, who is protecting Jamie. And you've probably seen Troy. He's shown up in so much stuff. He's been in everything from Ace Ventura: Pet Detective to Under Siege. He was on ER for years. He plays the sheriff in one of my favorite horror comedies, The Frighteners. He brings a little bit of levity and sort of just normalcy to one of the police roles in the movie. I think that's pretty fun.
Yeah, I remember seeing him as the deputy for the first time. I'm like, oh my God, this guy's been in everything.
Yeah.
He's one guy. Unfortunately, they've never had him. Well, I don't know if they had him, at the previous conventions that I went to, but at 35 and 40, he wasn't there, and I was hoping. I was like, man, get Troy to the show, man. I would love to meet this guy.
Well, I think he's one of those guys from the franchise that's still working very regularly, so he may not have been available.
Could be, yeah. I know I think he's in Bosch, the Amazon show right now too.
He is.
So that's still going on, and I guess it's not easy to. And some people just don't want to. Some people will look back, and I know Paul Rudd for a long time talked about 6 and how he hated it, and how he was kind of like, I don't want anything to do with it. But he's kind of changed his tune now, and talks pretty highly about it, and is glad he did it. But some of these people, they get that stigma, and they think, oh God, I don't want to be known for that. But then you go to these conventions. I think you go to one, like Sandy Johnson finally came to one. They finally tracked her down. She came to Halloween 40, and I think she probably saw that payday and was like, why have I not been doing this?
Which one? Sandy Johnson, which one is she from?
She's from the first one. She played Judith.
Oh, that's right, because they really had a hard time tracking her down, didn't they?
They did, yes. Somebody, I guess, kind of stumbled upon her and maybe messaged her and I think it might have been Sean Clark even. Next thing you know, she was announced for Halloween 40, and I was like, what? She's never done one of these. And then they got her boyfriend, they got David Kyle to come, and he had never done one. It's like, man, these guys.
Wasn't he like, or maybe he is? He was a born again Christian, so like I thought that may have been something he didn't want to do.
Could have been. I don't know a whole lot about him. I just know that when they announced both of them as showing up, I was pretty geeked about it because those are guys who don't do it. They don't do the shows, and I don't know that David Kyle will do anymore. But man, Sandy Johnson has definitely taken to it, and she's done maybe 3 or 4 over the past year. But man, when you can go from a regular life, I think she was teaching in Texas, I believe. when they found her. And it's like, if you can go from, she hadn't acted in 25 years or so.
Yeah.
And if you can, from making what you make as a teacher to work in 3 or 4 conventions, even a year, and making an extra $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, that's hard to turn down. Just from movies that you made, for 45 years ago now. I know she was in Gas Pump Girls, right? She was in Halloween, obviously, but she does, and of course she was, one of her big things back then, she was a Playboy Playmate or whatever, and I know people were taking stuff like that for her to sign, but stuff like that draws huge interest, man. And I think these people who are reluctant to do it, once they do it, they're probably like, why have I not been doing this the last 25 or 30 years and making a couple extra grand a weekend?
Well, that's they have no idea. I would guess.
See, these things are so huge now, man. People are charging just ridiculous prices. I was lucky enough to get Jamie Lee when she was in Indianapolis back in 2013, I believe. 2011 or 2013. I can't remember which year that was.
It was 13.
Okay, she was doing. Yeah, that's right. Because put out the DVD that you sent me that
Blu-ray, man.
How cool is that? I was like, what? I made it? I've never seen it. I have it, but I've never watched it. And you sent me that shot. You're like, dude, you made the Blu-ray.
It's awesome. I was like, man, I tell you what, there were some sour grapes in the Thomas household that night.
It was so cool that she decided to do this. And she was charging $70 an autograph, which, to normal people who don't collect and things like that, they're like, dude, you paid $70 for somebody to write their name on something. But that's cheap. When you see what some of these people charge, people like Arnold Schwarzenegger charging $300, $400, $500 a signature, Stallone charging $600 or $700 a signature. It's like, man, common people can't do that.
Right.
I mean, you just, but I think, when she did that one, she said, listen, she told us then, she's like, this is the only one I'm ever doing. Like, I'm not doing any more. Don't ask. It's not going to happen. But I know when she did that, she donated all of the money she made to the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, which was cool. Yeah. She bought her own plane ticket to come to Indy, from what I hear. And like, that's pretty cool to do. So I understand why you kind of, some people, she distanced herself from this, series for a long time. I get it. But you would think that even every couple of years, if you realize, man, I can make $100,000 or so to be donated to charity, why wouldn't you come out and do it? You got all these fans that love you, would love to meet you. I get that some people just don't like that type of thing, but it's almost, in my mind, it's almost like you kind of owe it to fans to be, you know what I mean? Especially in the horror genre, not any other genre, because big blockbusters and things like that, I get it. But the horror genre, man, it's just different. It's a different feel. It's a different, to me, you go to these shows and you see people there who, you have the goth crowd, the people in all black with the black makeup and the eyeliner and all the tattoos and all that stuff. And then you got, the professionals, the doctors, the lawyers. You see all these people who just love these movies. Like, that's the good thing about horror. It's kind of more, to me, it's more accessible to everybody. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the appeal of horror, is that it sort of speaks to the people on on a basic primal level. I mean, everyone's afraid. Everyone's afraid of something. When you're in a theater, watching a scary movie with everyone, everyone screams at the same stuff. Everyone gets freaked out at the same stuff. So, everyone is on the same level whenever you're watching a really, really good scary movie. And again, with horror, there's a bit of a, okay, this isn't Gone with the Wind. This isn't something classy. This isn't some period British piece that, I feel like I need to break out my my tuxedo to watch. I could just sit in my PJs and watch it and just have a really good time. So, I completely understand what you're saying with that.
It's so fun for me now to again, having been so many conventions and been blessed to meet so many of these actors. It's cool for me to go and see somebody who's there for the first time. I ran into a kid at age 40 who is I think he's from Ohio or Indianapolis or somewhere up in there, who was at his first convention. He saved up his money, flew out because he loves Halloween, and just to see him kind of interacting with some of the characters. And it's funny, we were walking together to one of the buildings. I can't remember where we were going that day, but Tom Atkins walked beside us, and to see his face light up like, oh my God, it's Tom Atkins, and he kind of broke off from us and went over to try to talk to Tom, and just to see that, I'm kind of jaded to that kind of thing now after meeting all of them. I'm not a starstruck, oh my God, I'm shaking, I'm meeting somebody type of guy. It's like, that's cool. I kind of got a little nervous when I met Aaron Paul. That was pretty cool. That was out of nowhere, saw him on the streets of Hollywood. I was like, oh my God, that's Jesse Pinkman. But for the most part, it's like, dude, this is just a person. I mean, but some of these people take it so far over the top. But it's cool that you can ignite that passion or that feeling in someone else just from portraying a character on the big screen,
I mean, that's why people connect. That's absolutely why people connect, with those characters, is that you're doing such a good job. And, that's what makes a movie like Halloween and its sequels successful.
And I've been to a lot of these and kind of taken out of the, not necessarily Halloween, but other folks who do all these conventions, and yet for some reason they're just miserable. You'll meet certain people. 99% of the people that you meet at these are so thankful and so grateful, and they want to hear your stories. And Norman Reedus is probably the nicest dude I have ever met in that industry ever. He spends time with everybody. He'll be signing for 7 or 8 hours. Some of these folks sign for 2 or 3 hours. Norman's lines are 7 or 8 hours, and he'll talk to people. And I've seen him pull a mask out from under, like in a gym bag that he had, and give it to a little girl for her birthday, and just giving people different things, like just super, super nice, super sweet. And then you get people like Lou Ferrigno, who does all the shows, and he's an a-hole. Like he's miserable. I've seen him literally take his hand and put it in the face of a kid in a Spider-Man costume, who was probably couldn't be no more than 10 or 11, because the kid was trying to take his picture without paying. I'm like, are you kidding me, dude? Like, it's guys like that. Like, why do you still do these shows? Nobody's at your table because you're a jerk, And then you get those guys who are kind of on the cusp of, and he's one of my favorites, and I hate to say it, he's not a jerk, but he's not like super sociable either, and there's no pictures at the table, and sometimes there's 2 tables set up, and sometimes he won't even necessarily acknowledge you much. But Bruce Campbell, man, and I love Bruce, but it's just that, and I like how he sets it up to where, okay, if you want a picture with me, we get pictures at this time. You want autographs, get pictures autographs at this time and this time. But if you miss, unfortunately, the first time I ever met him, I missed the picture session, and because I thought 2 that day, right? So I talked to his handler, and I was like, man, I missed it. Here's my ticket. He's like, all right, man, you can go up there. He's like, but he's not going to look at the camera. He's not going to, you can't really pause and pose or anything. And when I told Bruce what happened, he actually kind of leaned back in his chair a little bit, like as to get a little bit further away from me. So the picture didn't necessarily turn out. It's like, that's, yeah, but to his credit, we talked and we had a good conversation. But certain guys like that, I want to hear a Bruce Campbell interview. I want him to be serious. So much of Bruce's stuff, whether it be on Twitter, whether it be on interviews, like, I want to know Bruce Campbell. I want to read it. I don't want that. Not everything has to be funny. You don't have to put humor into anything or everything. But to me, it always feels like he's playing this character.
You get the yeah.
It's a shtick. Yeah, I want, because I love, man, Briscoe County Jr. loved it. Right, Burn Notice is one of my favorite TV shows ever.
Dude, you were one of the original Briscoe fans. I can remember from like middle school.
Absolutely, I used to miss it because we were at the bowling alley on Friday nights, and I remember Briscoe playing up on the TV. I'm like, man, I'm missing it right now. Of course, it only ran 1 season, but it was great. It was a little bit before its time. If that would have came out a couple years later, that would have been a smash hit in my opinion. But again, I love Bruce, and I just wish he would come out and do some stuff that's not acting, that's serious, but just some interviews so we can get to know him, and not everything has to be a quick one-liner or a joke. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I follow Bruce on Facebook and Twitter and completely see what he's doing there.
Well, I'm not sure how I got off on that tangent. I apologize. But let's get back to the Halloween series here. So I think we both agree that part 5 is probably, if we take the originals, again, take the zombies out of it, take part 3 out of it, Halloween 5 is probably the second worst in the series. Is that what we're both probably going to agree on?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Let's go ahead and let's talk about part 6. And we have obviously 2 parts with part 6. We have the original theatrical cut, and then we have that ever elusive, producer's cut that finally came available to everybody about 2 years ago. I remember you actually had a bootleg copy of it many years ago, and you let me watch it. So I was kind of ahead of the game there from everybody else. And I didn't even know about it until we had talked about it sometime in the late 90s. But let's talk about the original theatrical version first. Give me your thoughts on that. Just give me your thoughts and your feelings on the theatrical release.
Well, I feel a little, I have to preface, Halloween 6 when I talk about the theatrical cut, because it was the first Halloween movie that I saw on the big screen. We were, as in 8th grade. This was September of 1995 when this movie came out, and I can remember going and, oh man, this was, it'd been since 1989 since a Halloween movie had been in the theaters. So 6 years, a long time. So, I was jazzed, and I was waiting, and, I got my dad to take me to, to the theater to see it. He dropped me off, and I was late. So I missed about the first 5 minutes of the movie. So I walk in, and I remember I'm walking in, and I find my seat, and it's right at that moment where the nurse that helps Jamie escape is in that corridor, and she turns around, she hears something, and she says, she's crying, and she's like, Jamie, and you just see the shaped mask materialize out of the darkness behind her and grabs her by the throat, slams her head onto this spike that's in the wall, and he takes a step back, and then the Halloween theme starts playing on electric guitar. And at the moment, I thought that was the coolest thing I had ever seen, man. I was jazzed. I was like bouncing up and down on my seat. I really just thought that was so cool. And I loved the whole thing. I mean, in 8th grade, 1995, I was 13 years old. I just thought it was awesome. It was the first Halloween movie I seen on the big screen. I think I saw it twice when it played, at the Tri-City Theater. It was there for, I think, all of 2 weeks. And I made my dad take me to see it again. It was just, it was complete blinders at the time. And I still have a really heavy nostalgic sort of, when I watch the movie, I can see the faults, and there are plenty of them, but I still get this nostalgic twinge of that movie. Like, man, it reminds me of a different time. And it was, and it was a lot of fun.
Funny story. You said you went down and watched it in Jackson. I remember going down thinking it was still playing, was all geeked about watching it, and I can't remember if my dad took me down or mom or someone took me down to Jackson to watch it. We get there, it had been taken off, and in its place was How to Make an American Quilt. I was like, do you remember that movie? I never seen the movie. Do you remember the title? It was like a Winona Ryder or something like that.
I remember that title for sure.
Like, what is this junk? So I actually never saw it until it came out on video, months later, as we had to wait back then for it to come out. Like, man, when is this thing coming out on VHS? But when I finally did watch it, kind of the same with you. Back then, you're 13, 14 years old, so you're not nitpicking. You're just watching it. Okay, it was a good movie, and you go on. But over the years, the more I watch it, like you said, it has that little nostalgic feel. And I really, against popular opinion, I dig it. I really like the producer's cut more, but parts of it. But I really like part 6. Looking back, the more you watch and you see all these reshoots that they did at the end of the movie, and you're like, how come Michael is so much skinnier? Yeah. At the end of the movie than he is at the beginning. But I really dug the mask. I thought the mask was a huge upgrade. Probably the best mask obviously the best mask since part 2. I thought they did a really good job with that. But overall, I really liked it. I liked the vibe. I liked how Daniel Farron's I like the direction of it. I just thought it was shot well. I don't necessarily think. I don't know. I'm not going to say it doesn't age well, but it just. I think from all the crap that you hear about it for so long, that it's like, man, I got to try to defend this against all that crap. But then when you watch it, you're like, yeah, okay, I see why people might not like it, but to me, I still really like it.
Yeah, I think it's got more positives than negatives, especially in the original cut of it. It's really well cast. I mean, Paul Rudd is great as Tommy Doyle in the movie. I mean, we've talked a little bit about Paul Rudd in that movie before, and this was his first role. He actually shot this before Clueless, so this came out about like 3 months after Clueless came out in '95. But he really tackles it well. Like, this guy is damaged. This was a dude that witnessed something really, really messed up as a child, and it's sort of reverberated with him for the rest of his life. And I remember hearing interviews with different I think it was maybe with Daniel Farrens, where he's talking about the Paul Rudd really, he was right out of drama school, so of course he took this very seriously. And I don't know if you've ever read any of Farrens' original drafts of Halloween 6, but they're very well written. I mean, they're really, really good. He really put his all into it, and you can tell that Rudd really took what was on the page and ran with it. He's taken it very, very seriously, and he just is right up there at the top. He's really great. Pleasance has a lot to play with, especially in the producer's cut. I really like Marianne Hagen in the movie. She's the Laurie substitute, so to speak, but there's actually some character development there. A really fun backstory, and then the rest of the movie is peppered with really fun character actors. Everyone from like Leo Rossi playing Barry Sims, who is just this Howard Stern wannabe. And funnily enough, they offered the role to Howard Stern, who turned it down.
Leo Grader, right? That's who you meant?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, not Leo Rossi. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I liked his portrayal of Sims as well. And I remember hearing the story about, they wanted Stern to do it, but he was doing private parts or whatever, and he couldn't come in and do it, so they got this guy. And he's another elusive character that's never done one of the shows that I've ever been to. But I know he does, I think he's works on TV and The Closer, maybe. He has some kind of a director role or something.
He's a pretty successful producer now, so yeah, he's got a lot of that on his plate.
I thought they could have touched a little bit more. I think things were too rushed with all the characters in this one. I would like to see a little bit more play out with him. I thought he could have been a pretty fun character for the show.
Yeah, I agree in that regard. I think he gets a little bit more to do in the producer's cut, but he's kind of that connective tissue. One aspect that I love that they use him for is sort of like that, connecting everyone together at the beginning of the movie. And it works so much better in the producer's cut, but his broadcast that everyone seems to be listening to. Jamie's listening to it in the van when she's escaping. Dr. Loomis is listening to it. Kara is listening to it. Of course, Tommy Doyle is listening to it. I love that it's that connective tissue of the people of Haddonfield. And I think that's something that Daniel Farrens did purposefully, because he's such a fan of Halloween 2 and how that sort of expanded, the city of Haddonfield and made it feel like this lived-in place.
Yeah, good point. Never really thought about it like that, but yeah, with like you said, the way everybody's listening to that broadcast. And it's always funny. That's what always gets me about horror movies. It's everybody just happens to be gathered around the state radio listening to the same station. You know what I mean? Kind of like Halloween 3 when he tries to get all the get the 3 stations to shut off the Silver Shamrock commercials, right? It's like those are the only 3 stations that are playing that commercial right now, and you just happen to have a number to all of them.
Yep.
Okay, well, whatever. But yeah, I liked, again, with George back for 6. I actually liked his mannerisms, and it might be just the way it was shot, with a little bit more of the blue backlighting, kind of like from the first one, and the mask. I think that had a lot to do with how I felt of George's portrayal in this one. I just thought it was so much better. Certain aspects I don't like when he pushes the nurse up against the spike and he kind of looks at her with that head turn. I thought that seemed forced. That didn't seem like a natural kind of, again, going back to Nick and comparing everybody to Nick, it didn't seem like a just a smooth, even something as simple as you would think a head nod would be. It just didn't look right coming from George at that moment, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in the same opinion of you. I do, for the most part, really like George in part 6. I think he moves a lot more naturally. And at basically, if you're looking at, continuity-wise, where the series is and how old Michael would be, he looks the age. He looks the age, and I love there's more of a fluid movement to his version of Michael Myers than he previously did in part 4. Especially like the scene where he's chasing Kara and Danny across the street from the Myers house back to the boarding house, Mrs. Blankenship's house, and then also the scene where he's stalking Kara's mom, and that scene where she's going through the laundry that's hanging in the backyard, and she pulls down that final sheet, and there's Michael standing there with an axe. There's a little bit more of a fluidity to his performance than he previously did in part 4. And again, I've never heard whether or not that came from George himself or if that's the direction he got from Joe Chappelle. But at any rate, when it's on the screen, it's good. And it's really, really evident, especially in the theatrical cut when they cut to the reshoots and George wasn't invited back. And it's, I believe it's a stuntman named A. Michael Lerner, who, correct, in my humble opinion, is the worst Michael Myers in the entire series. He's awful. He holds his arms out to the side like he's in some sort of bizarre Superman pose. There's actually a shot where he's chasing them through these corridors in the bottom where he actually runs, and I'm like, whoa, has this guy actually seen a Halloween movie? I mean, it blows my mind how bad he is.
Yeah, and he's a lot. I had the chance to meet him finally at age 40, and again, good dude, really nice guy. Cool that he's out, back out on the scene now doing these things. But he was so skinny. You see those side shots of him walking through the hallway, and he kind of arches his back a little bit. He's got this kind of posture, and he's just it's like, man, he's just real skinny. I didn't have as big of issue with him. I did have an issue with you're moving a little fast for Michael. But overall, to me, I don't think it necessarily hurts the film in any, like you said, the film has plenty of things to pick on. I don't think that adds a whole lot of, any doesn't make it any worse. It kind of boggles my mind that they wouldn't ask George back. I mean, it can't be that hard to, okay, we got to do some reshoots. George, fly out, do this, do that. I know, Lerner's dad had a role in, he was like a stuntman as well, and I think he kind of got his son, this job, or at least said, hey, they're casting for this, go in. I think I heard where there was like 3 guys. They kind of looked at them all. I don't know. This is from what I heard from an interview with A. Michael, but it was something like 3 or 4 guys were in a room. They just kind of looked at him and said, okay, you're the right size, the right type, you're what we want. I don't think they ever had him to do any kind of test shoots or anything like that. It was just like, okay, you got the size, get in there, you got it, which is kind of odd. But I guess with this movie, that the curse of Michael Myers, I guess the whole cursed filming process and things like that, just it went right along with it,
Oh, for sure. And it's funny, going from the actual segueing into from the theatrical cut to, and staying on the theatrical cut for a minute is that, we talked a little bit, especially with Halloween 2, about how there was sort of an upping of the ante when it came to the gore. And, and part 4 definitely had its fair share of gore. I thought 5, pretty much stayed in line with Halloween 4 itself. Halloween 6 definitely, was a step up. We have exploding heads, from people that are impaled on fuse boxes to, guys getting their heads completely twisted around to faces crushed through, gates.
Right.
It's really noticeable, and not to mention Jamie's death in the movie, which is, it's graphic, but also implied graphic with, farm machinery involved. So, that's definitely one way where Halloween's The Curse of Michael Myers sticks above the rest, and not only differentiates itself, in the theatrical cut versus the producer's cut, which is a bit more, reserved.
Mm-hmm. It's funny you talk about the head exploding, and going back to just Bradford English. How good was he? He was so good in that role. He might be the best after Paul Rudd. He might be the best thing in that movie. Like, I thought, man, this guy's a jerk. Like, okay, typically you watch it and okay, this guy's gonna get killed, and he's gonna get killed.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like when me and you were talking about The Americans, and I was like, man, there's one character on there I wanted them to die so bad. It's the same thing on this one. It's like you watch this and you're like, I want this guy just to die as painful a death as he possibly can at the hands of Michael.
Right. Yeah.
I thought he was great. I thought Kim Darby was really good. The one thing that really got me with her was whenever she's trying to run out of the house from Michael, and she runs out back and pushes the laundry away, and are you just now realizing there's a fence in your backyard? Because she looks at the fence like she's surprised it's there. Like, have you ever been out back? Like, there's laundry here, so you probably hung it out. How do you forget there's a fence right there that you can't get through?
To be fair,
do you remember that?
To be fair, they did just move in.
Right? Maybe the husband hung out the laundry then, right?
I kind of doubt that.
that part always sticks out to me. I'm like, man, how stupid are you? But I thought she played a really good role. I love that death scene. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Without actually showing it, like like the guy that Jamie takes his truck and they show is snapping the head and the spine coming out the back. I'm like, yeah, I don't need to see that. That's a little bit too much. So I like that they didn't necessarily show her head coming off or anything like that, but they showed the blood spatter. I just didn't get the whole scene with the washer in the basement either. I'm like, if the power's out, how's that washer running? I don't even later on. It's like, what? That doesn't.
That's very true.
Doesn't make sense to me. But the deaths are definitely. I kind of like the exploding head. I think in the theatrical version as compared to the producer's cut. I think I kind of like that. I thought that was pretty cool. After saying I don't like to see all that gore and I don't need to see it, I think for that character it was okay.
He's so unlikable.
Very much so.
Yeah.
So going from that to the producer's cut, I'll say a couple things first, and then you chime in, man. And I think on the theatrical cut, if I'm not mistaken, it's Paul Rudd doing the voiceover at first, telling about Michael and what happened all those years ago, and I really dug that. And then on the producer's cut, it was Loomis doing that voiceover, and I actually thought, as much as I love Loomis's character and Donald Pleasance, I thought it was better delivered by Paul Rudd. I thought, okay, this is a fresh voice. This is, we're so used to Loomis's voice anyway, and we've heard him say everything about, the past already. To hear it coming from a fresh perspective from a kid that was involved in the original murders all those years ago, I thought, okay, it's better coming from Rudd than it is from Loomis. What say you on that?
Well, I think the original intention going forward was that, Tommy Doyle wasn't established by that point in the movie when they did the producer, the quote unquote the original cut, the producer's cut. You didn't meet Tommy until a little bit later in the movie. So their original intention was like, okay, everyone knows who Dr. Loomis is. They'll understand and recognize the voice of Donald Pleasance. And then another part of that is that. And again, I don't know how much this is true. There's so much out there about Halloween 6. It's crazy, but Daniel Farron's, one of his things that he said is that director Joe Chappelle, thought, Donald Pleasance was boring. And that's why in the theatrical cut, there's his role is significantly cut down, and that could be part of it. Is that in the producer's cut, he does do the original voiceover, so that again could be an additional part of that. I don't really have. I think both of them do a really good job, with that voiceover. And there's it's funny because both of them use the sort of the cult, they're in the cult room where they're doing the ceremony, but there's actually a third version of that I guess is only ever aired on television that has them performing that same ceremony. And I believe it's Paul Rudd's voiceover, but it's shot inside of that same surgical room from the very, very end of the theatrical cut of Halloween, the Curse of Michael Myers. Have you ever seen that, Brent?
That's not ringing a bell. No, I don't know that I've seen that one.
If you do some Google searching, you should be able to find it, but it's like really crappy quality. I think it's only ever aired on like cable years and years and years ago. That's like one of the few alternate scenes that they ever filmed. And yeah, it does like even more, taking the cult out of the whole storyline. It's like goes even further than the theatrical cut does. It's kind of interesting, but again, it's such a weird thing. It's the same voiceover, but just with a different shot in the surgical room.
I have to look for that for sure, because that's something I would like to see. I try to look this week. I tried to look for different versions. There's so many alternate endings, so many deleted scenes, and I kind of wanted to go back and kind of refamiliarize myself with those. And I found a lot for 7 and a lot for 8 and things like that, but never stumbled across this one. That's one I'll definitely look for. I really dug in the I guess producer's cut, maybe even in the whole thing. I really dug the music in kind of that rock ballad type, music in this, in part 6, as compared to, you coming from the more electronic stuff from part 2, like we talked about. Part 4 and 5 kind of went back to the more traditional, I guess. But I really dug kind of the upbeat, especially when Michael is chasing them in the hallway, and you just get kind of that little guitar riff and then that kind of rock. I don't know. Did you like that?
You know what? I do like that. Because it's weird, because that's actually completed score. The score that that we see in the producer's cut, whether or not it be the Blu-ray that came out with the set a couple years ago, or the bootlegs that I had 23 years ago. That's all temp music. That wasn't supposed to be the final mix. So yeah, I do give the edge to the quote unquote wailing guitars, because I do think it's kind of cool and it sounds really awesome. And especially, I love the shaped stalks. When he's chasing Kara and Danny across the street, the dunt, 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 dunt,
Yes.
with done on guitars. It sounds really, really cool. And and that's one aspect of the theatrical cut that I've sort of held on to, that is one thing that I really like.
What did you think about, obviously they were starting in 4, they were going to this whole Man in Black deal. I like how they flash back. I think it was in the producer's cut, they kind of flash back and show how Michael got out, of the jail cell in part 5, and Jane kind of getting taken and all that stuff. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that whole, the druids and the ruins and all that stuff? Were you a fan of that? I guess at some point you have to try something different, because you do get stagnant with, okay, it's Michael, he's killing, it's Michael, he's killing, it's Michael, he's killing. So I was okay with them trying to put certain aspects in. Certain things kind of confuse me. Again, the whole, is this Michael's niece having Michael's kid? What's happening? What, you know what I mean? There's a lot of things that kind of stand out in your mind. It's kind of confusing. Yeah. But what are your overall thoughts with them going with the whole druids and ruins and all that stuff, and ultimately being Dr. Wynn, who's been kind of the mastermind of this whole thing for all these years?
Well, as I touched on earlier, I'm much more of a fan of the simplicity of this franchise, which is why, sort of the first one is my, miles and miles and miles above favorite of all of them. I feel like once you start to explain a lot of this stuff, it loses its potency. But if you're going to do that, I felt like the direction the Halloween 6 went was pretty smart, and I think a lot of that is that, and just because someone's a fan doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be good at this. But I think Daniel Farron's being a fan, but also being an incredibly intelligent guy and thoughtful guy, he knew how to approach this, and there was an enthusiasm with his work on this movie that really, helped it along. And I thought that they kept it within like the Halloween spirit, especially with Halloween 2, where he's talking about Sam Hain and the Celtic. He really did a good job of connecting it with the holiday itself, which I thought a lot of the sequels didn't do a good job of doing. It was just like Michael Myers is the holiday and it's on Halloween and that's it. But really connecting it back to, hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, and what Halloween actually was, when it came out of Europe, and it was about sacrifice, and it was about, the hills running red with blood. And I thought that was a really smart way of approaching, this sequel, and sort of like what made Michael Myers Michael Myers. It's not the best explanation, but I think it, in the producer's cut, it works.
What about with Jamie? Were you happy with, obviously we've all heard the story of, they wanted Daniel Harris to come back for hey, your secondary character, you're going to get killed off quickly. We're not paying you X amount. We're going to give you this much. Come back or not. She chose not to. And then they hired J.C. Brandy to come in and play play the character, which in the original, theatrical release, obviously she doesn't have a huge role. She's gone within the first couple minutes. Cut to the producer's cut. She still hangs around for quite a while. What were your thoughts of her? Did you like that? Would you like to have seen Danielle back to reprise that role? Did you like how JC kind of portrayed that character? What are your thoughts on her?
For continuity's sake, I would have really liked to have seen Danielle Harris back, because I think she's just a really good actress. Forget, the Halloween franchise, which is what she's mostly done and what she's known for. She's a really good, actress. So it'll have been nice to see that continuity there. How the character's handled in the theatrical cut is unfortunate. It's just, she's so just an afterthought, and it's like, this character you followed for 2 movies, we're just gonna have her go out in this really sort of terrible way. The producer's cut is a little better. I think it's nicer. It's a little classier. It fits a little bit more in with the classical nature of Halloween. But again, she spends a good portion of the movie in a hospital bed, with getting a bullet in her head. I know I read a draft of the script, years and years and years ago, where kind of that same thing happens to Jamie, but she's sort of in a coma, but then she wakes up at some point and she sort of helps them at the end of the movie. So she sort of gets to go out as a hero. She's helping Kara and Tommy escape from Smith's Grove. So that would have been something cool to see, but unfortunately, that's not something that was filmed along the way. So neither one of the versions is ideal, but I would probably go with the producer's cut version as the better version of Jamie.
Yeah, I think that was a big mistake. The same way that 5 did the Rachel character. I think that was a mistake, and I think it was a mistake. Kill her off, that's fine in this one. Again, give her, we spent time investing, 2 movies into this character, and then it's just like, okay, and that's enough. Like, man, you can't do that, even if it's for, shock value or whatever. You got to give her a better death, a more meaningful death than that. Have her doing something to save that baby, or like you said, helping them out of Smith Groves at the end. Would have been cool to see, but ultimately that obviously didn't happen. Another casting change that maybe would have happened back in the day had they could get a hold of him would have been Brian Andrews in the role of Tommy. We've all heard that story, I think, if you're a big fan of the series or horror in general, that they wanted, Brian to come back and reprise that role, but with him not having an agent, I guess, at the time, they said they were unable to reach him. So, they ultimately got Paul Rudd, which, you can't say anything bad about Paul Rudd, but would you have liked to seen that? Would you have liked to seen Andrews back? Do you think he could have pulled that off? Do you think, with no one, it seems like Brian's maybe going through some hard times lately. Would this maybe have
have changed his career, his life. Would you see that?
It's really hard to tell. Paul Rudd is Paul Rudd. He's a really really good actor. I mean, he's able to do dramatic stuff. I mean, of course, now being in 2019, we're all familiar with Paul Rudd doing a lot of Marvel stuff, Ant-Man, all the Avengers things. But Paul Rudd's a really really good actor, and I think that maybe at the end of the day, that's what they needed to go for. I can't speak for where Brian Andrews was, in 1994 when they were filming this movie and when they were casting. But I don't know. I feel like we got a really good performance, for that role. So that's kind of where I am there.
Sure, that makes sense. I would have I like what they're doing now with all these cameos and all these kind of bringing people back. I would love to have seen them bring Brian back. Age 35, spent some time, around him, signing graphs and taking pictures, and him going on that bus tour with this. He was just a really nice dude. So hopefully things are going, hopefully things are going his way. But now, I know you were friends with him on Facebook, and I became friends with him on Facebook, and I was actually going to reach out to him to see if he wanted to talk about, some of the Halloween stuff. But I know recently it seems like, just from his post, that right now might not be the best time. So
yeah,
hopefully in the future, I might reach out to him and say, hey man, come on and shoot the breeze with me. Talk about some Halloween stuff. I'd love to hear some of his stories. But I think it would have been cool to see him back. But like you said, I think, we'll never know. We don't know what was going on. So not playing the what if game. I think they did a really, really good job with Paul Rudd. I think he played that role. Like you said, you can tell this kid's been tortured. You can tell just from the shot when he's looking at Kara through the camera, and when she sees him, and just the way he pulls away from that camera, the look on his face. You know what I mean? Something as simplistic as that. You're like, wow. You can tell the emotional pain this guy's in just from that shot.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, going back and forth, and I probably watch Halloween 6 more than any of the other sequels, just because, again, going back to the nostalgia, Brett, one of my favorite things about the producer's cut about the movie is it's some of the little shots in it that add atmosphere that for whatever reason they took out of the theatrical cut that I just, for the life of me, can't understand. Like the scene when they first introduced Loomis, that scene is so much longer. Like there's this long tracking shot where you hear even more and more of the Barry Sims broadcast, and it's sort of giving you this look that you never ever got in the movies before of Loomis's home. That he's living out in the country, and it's almost like this den. It's almost like he's this Englishman that's transplanted himself to America, and he's got this almost like English home, and something like that I really love. And then there's a shot of the shape being let out of the cage. Like he walks up to this gate, and this gate sort of slides to the side and lets the shape out, and he comes walking out. That's only in the producer's cut. That's a shot that I absolutely adore. But I think one of my absolute favorites is at the end of the broadcast when Jamie is called into the Barry Sims show, and she's, Dr. Loomis, are you out there? It's me, Dr. Loomis. Michael's coming, and he's listening with Dr. Wynn. And there's this shot that they add of Loomis opening up this box that he has that has his revolver in it. And then it pans up, and he's wearing a jacket and his scarf. It's such a badass shot, and I love it. It's so Loomis, and they cut that out of the theatrical cut, and for the life of me, and I was like, that's so cool. And that just reinforces the fact that I believe Daniel Farrens when he says that Joe Chappelle thought Donald Pleasance was boring, because that's such a cool shot, and the fans love that, and I can't understand why they cut it out.
I don't get, if you're a fan of this series, I don't get how you can think Loomis is boring. I don't think how Donald Pleasance himself is boring as a character. It's like he's the one thing that ties those first 5 of the first 6 movies together. He's that glue, It goes in all these different directions, but he is the staple. Like, people love him, and more of him is better. And I totally agree with that. That shot where he's pulling that revolver out is cool. And the shot of Michael coming out of that cage, like said too, with the metal door opening up as he steps up to it, and just the shot of his feet walking through there. I for some reason I didn't remember that specific scene until I watched it 2 days ago, and I was like, holy crap, I've forgotten all about that. And that's just a cool shot, like somebody's unleashing the beast.
Yeah,
you know?
There's a lot of those in that, and like even like when Barry Sims is killed later on, in the theatrical cut, it's like that Michael has for whatever reason, has decided he's going to kill Barry Sims. He's in Barry Sims's van, whereas in the producer's cut, it's that Barry, in his wisdom, being on his phone and complaining to his producer, gets in the wrong van. He gets in the Smiths Grove van, and they clearly show that. And I think that's a fun little touch, that, in all of his, excess and his neuroses and his narcissism, that Barry got in the wrong van. And that's what led to his downfall.
Good point. Because I always wondered, I'm like, why is Michael, why is he coming after Barry? What's going on there?
Yeah.
But then when they show that, you're like, oh, that's why, because he got in the wrong van.
Uh-huh.
And my other thought on that is, again, you're kind of suspending belief there, but it's like, okay, how did he take the time to shimmy up this tree with a body on him, wrap this guy in wax, and get him up in that tree? It's like some of those little things, like, come on, guys. I can understand in the first one, you see him carrying the bodies in the house. He lays the characters down. He puts them up in the cabinets, whatever he does with them. Okay, it's in a house. You can't see it. Nobody's in there. But you're out in the middle of a park. How you getting that guy up in that tree? It's little stuff like that to me is like, come on.
Evidently, he found an extended ladder. He climbed up there. He told the kids, "There's nothing to see here. Mind your business."
Had one dude steady the ladder at the bottom for him so he didn't fall.
Yeah. He's like, "Hey, man, I'm in my 40s. I don't need to break my neck."
Oh man, but overall, I really dig it. I really like it. The producer's cut, obviously, the ending is the big thing with oh man, now this curse has been passed over to Loomis.
Yeah.
Whereas the theatrical release, it's like it kind of leaves it up to the viewer, I guess, where okay, he goes in and he screams, right?
Yeah.
Is he screaming because he sees the mask and Michael's gone?
No.
Is he screaming because he sees the mask, but then Michael kills him? Like, it's like, oh, there's this, part of you that, okay, Loomis is dead, or Loomis is still alive and Michael's gone. But, unfortunately, Pleasance passed away before it even came out. So it's like, wonder where they would have went with that character.
It's so weird that, I think the producer's cut ending is obviously stronger. It sort of builds on what they've been doing. You're like, okay, I see where that ending came from. It's not the best. But the theatrical cut is like did they do rock, paper, scissors for that thing? And it's like, I have no idea. There's like green goo coming out of the Shape's mask. I have no idea. But dude, I read I think I still own this draft, and I have it somewhere. I have a draft of Halloween 6. That there's this, it sort of plays around the same way that Tommy saves Kara and Danny and the baby from the sacrifice, and they're going through the corridors of Smith's Grove, and they keep coming to those locked gates that like we saw earlier when they let the Shape through, and they would get to one, and they're panicking, they can't get through, and someone keeps opening one for them, so they open it up, and then they slam it behind them. And I forget what had happened, but the Shape is on fire behind them. So Michael is coming after them, and he's on fire. And what the script shows is that it's actually Dr. Loomis is opening the gates for them from the control room. And so it's such just an awesomely visualized, as far as in the script written, it would have been so cool to see that on screen. But I think that I think Farrens was really writing for the movie. He's like, okay, I'm just going to put it on paper. It's up to them to see if they can budget this thing out. But it's very cool to read on page.
Very nice. I remember I think it was, it's probably 20 years ago that you were telling me about another draft. I believe it was for part 6 about the whole helicopter deal, right? Was that you that told me about part 6?
That's actually the same draft because, and I take it back because they don't have the baby. The Man in Black has Steven, and he's able to get into this helicopter, and there's like a helicopter that explodes or something like that, and they think that the baby's in it. the helicopter takes off, and then they all get in this van and they take off and they're chasing the helicopter. But I guess there was another draft where the helicopter explodes that I read in an interview with Farron's. And, going way, 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 way back, this is, 96, 97. This was when I was able to get my hands on a bootleg copy of Halloween 6 on VHS that looked like you were watching this thing through a fish aquarium. I mean, now that we're able to watch it on Blu-ray, we feel so blessed. I was like, oh my gosh, we were so happy to have it on VHS. But I can remember I somehow through a message board was able to get Daniel Farron's email address, and I emailed him. Way, way back in the day. I think he had an AOL account. It was so far back. And I was like, I don't know if I should, but I'm going to email him. And I emailed him one time and I asked him just a couple questions. And I was like, I'm sure it was all prefaced with, I'm so sorry to bother you, sir. I don't want to bother you. And, I know you're very busy and I hope this isn't, going against your privacy. And I asked him some questions about that draft, and he answered them for me. And it was very, very cool. And I also had Dick Warlock's email address too, and I don't think I ever emailed Dick Warlock because I was a little intimidated. But it was very, very fun, and Halloween 6 was one of those gateways for me, and as far as like alternate cuts and how cutthroat Hollywood can be, and especially when it came to Dimension Films and how they approached horror, and that was sort of the cherry on top, and just the way that they messed with the franchise and other franchises going forward. It was sort of an eye-opening experience.
No kidding. It's definitely cutthroat for sure, and you see that now with a lot of the Friday the 13th stuff. Like, it's kind of in this legal mumbo jumbo now. It's like, we want to make new ones, but it's tied up in this company or that company. This company has the rights. They don't want to give this company the rights. And it's like, but don't you guys kind of make those for the fans? Like, how about you work out a deal together and put it out there, and you both make money, I don't know. But overall, man, I'm with you. Halloween 6 is probably my top. It's probably in my top 3, to be honest with you. If it's not, it's number 4. It's in that area somewhere. But I dig it. I dig the vibe. I like everything about it. Again, I'll go with the producer's cut a little bit more. I didn't necessarily like the whole, the whole, ending where Loomis, you see the thorn show up on his wrist. I thought that was a little bit too much. But overall, I like the producer's cut a lot better.
I'm right there with you.
All right, guys, that was the first part of the Halloween episode with my good buddy Brandon Thomas. Appreciate you guys listening. Like I said at the beginning of the show, the second part of the episode will drop on the 31st, Halloween Day. So be sure and check that out and let me know what you guys think. And again, thanks for listening to another episode of Brent Ewing's Hey Buddy Podcast.